My name is Danna Staaf, and I am an author, marine biologist, and science communicator. My dissertation topic was the reproduction and early life of Humboldt squid, which I like to translate for a lay audience as squid, sex, and babies. And now I write popular science books for adults and for kids, and I give public lectures, and I draw funny educational comics. So I just came back from a science conference, the Cephalopod International Advisory Council in Okinawa, Japan. So this one is fresh in my mind. This is a conference that happens every 3 years. Researchers who study octopuses and squid and their relatives get together. And I attended in undergraduate and I attended in graduate school. And then I didn't attend for a long time while I was kind of getting my science writing career off the ground. But most of my books are about cephalopods. They're my favorite animals. And so I was really excited to get back to this conference. And I got to reconnect with researchers that I used to work with, researchers that I had interviewed for my books, and then also with students, people who were new to the field that I'd never met before. And that was really exciting. There were a lot of students who had already read some of my books and wanted to meet me. And one student in particular came up to me and said, "I'm here as a cephalopod researcher because of your book, Monarchs of the Sea." The student said that you presented science in such an accessible way that when I read it, I thought I could do this. I could be a scientist, and that's why I'm here. And I don't know which of the two of us was more excited to meet each other. This was just a dream come true for me because I love science communication. I'm really passionate about it. But to meet somebody who read my book and became a scientist as a result was just amazing. And I think that's a lot of what feels successful to me is my career as a science communicator. I often get to visit schools and I get to talk about science and writing and art. And the teachers and the kids really enjoy that combination that they can ask me questions about octopuses or about drawing or about how books are made. And then the kids will tell me about their scientific observations, essentially. You know, I saw a bug doing this in the yard yesterday, or they'll tell me about their little books that they've made or they've drawn. And it's not like a bestseller metric of success, but it feels very successful to me. So when I look back and think about grad school, it was not an easy time for me. And in some ways, this is a joke. It's not really true, but it felt true at the time. In some ways, everything about my graduate school experience felt like a failure. So I was like, what do I pick? But I was thinking about it and kind of processing things. And the thing that I want to talk about is actually a moral failure. I want to talk about all of the animals that I killed. I killed hundreds of squid for my research. And in my lab at the time, we didn't really discuss the ethics of animal sacrifice. Things have changed a bit since then. Cephalopods, which again are octopuses and squid, they have gotten a lot more attention, and in some places there's now legislation that sort of controls and covers how they can be used and treated in research, like there is with lab mice and other vertebrates. But at the time there was nothing, and nobody in my lab really talked about it. And I was very young. I was 21 when I started grad school, and I didn't know what I was doing, and I knew that I didn't know what I was doing, and I really wanted to impress my advisor, prove that I could be a good scientist. And I showed up and killing squid was part of that. It was what everyone was doing. So I jumped right in. And it's kind of wild to me now to think about that because I was and am a vegetarian. I have been my whole life because I don't want to eat animals. But I did have some experience already killing animals for science because I had done dissections. As an undergraduate, we dissected lots of different animals in my different research lab and classes. And I was actually more comfortable with dissection than a number of other students because I'm not a squeamish person. I find it fascinating what's inside a body and that type of how biology works, that very nitty-gritty organs and blood systems and things. And that's part of why I became a biologist, is that I find that so interesting. And this is a contradiction I'm still wrestling with and thinking about, that I really love animals and I really value their lives. And at the same time, I value studying and learning about them in ways that, at least now, at least in my experience, does involve ending their lives. And I really believe in the value of science, this way of learning and understanding the world around us, which introduces another sort of contradiction or complicated situation. And I certainly feel that way looking back at the research we were doing in grad school. We were focused on this species, the Humboldt squid, which is really large, really abundant, and people eat it a lot. It's actually one of the most fished invertebrates in the world. And we were working with fishers too, for whom this is their livelihood. Fishing squid is how they feed their families, their communities. And part of the goal of the research was to help that fishery be sustainable. The people who are fishing want it to be sustainable. They don't want it to crash. They don't want the animal to go extinct. So we were working a lot with fishers, working side by side with fishing boats, and none of the squid are coming out alive from that experience. They're being fished to be killed, to be eaten. So it kind of set the stage. Like, this is a deadly experience for the squid, whether we're doing research on them or not. And we did, as researchers, try not to be wasteful. That was something that people talked about. If we have an animal in front of us, we're going to try to get all the research samples we can. So one scientist is collecting blood, another's getting tissue for DNA. I was collecting eggs and sperm. But at the same time, it felt very callous. We were on a boat, the deck would be just covered with dead squid, and there would even be a kind of dark humor sometimes because, like many animals, squid can keep moving after they're dead. And I remember this one situation where a squid's head had been cut off with the arms, and then we saw the arms grab onto the body like it was trying to eat its own body. And everybody thought it was pretty funny, and people took pictures. And there wasn't anyone, as I can recall, sort of counteracting that, saying, let's be respectful. Let's remember that each of these was a living being. Nobody was really talking in those terms. And I wish that I had introduced that. It's clearly something I was capable of thinking about and that I would think about on my own time. But I was with all these people who were older than me, who were either implicitly or explicitly telling me how to behave. And there weren't even any other students in my lab when I started. The last one had graduated just before I came. And it was just a postdoc and my advisor. And I was also the only woman. And there were little sexist remarks and attitudes. It was enough that I felt very discouraged. Like, if I had thought about speaking up, it was not something that I wanted to do in that particular regard. I was trying to really match how everybody else around me was behaving. And so I ended up with this kind of separation. Like, here's my personal life. I'm not going to eat these squid, but other people are. And this is how the science is being done. And when I'm with them, when I'm being a scientist, this is how I'm going to behave. And at the same time, there was a part of it that was very true to myself, because I was very excited to learn from these squid, to learn what was inside them, to figure out, in my case, it was how they reproduce and how their babies develop. And I've always been into science communication. So with another graduate student, we actually started a whole outreach program using dead squid that were surplus, like fishing boats had caught them, and for one reason or another, they were just sort of sitting in a freezer. And so we started bringing those into classrooms and teaching kids about squid and about science through dissection. We called it Squids for Kids. And it was really great. That actually felt really good, because these were animals that for the most part had not been killed for outreach, but they were there, and we were kind of making the best of it. But then going out and catching and killing more squid, which we were also doing for research, was definitely a part of what made me feel pretty miserable in grad school, although it was hard to tease that apart from all of the other things that made me feel miserable in grad school, because I also often felt like I didn't know what I was doing academically. I wasn't sure that my papers were going to make sense, or if I was even going to have enough data to write papers, which then made me feel even worse about killing the squid, because if I'm not a good enough scientist to turn their deaths into meaningful research, then, like, really, what am I doing here? But I did manage to finish my PhD. I got enough data, and I published everything out of it, so that those chapters, those papers, are useful now to scientists and other fishers. But was it enough to justify the deaths? I don't know. It's not a question that I have an answer for. The first sentence in my dissertation acknowledgement, when I wrote up my whole thesis, before anything else, before I thanked my family or my advisor or anything, I wrote, "Many squid were sacrificed for this research, and I only hope that the science presented here will serve to make the world a better place for their descendants, as well as my own." Something that really helped was having peers that I could talk to, both about this particular issue and about all of our other failures and feelings of failure, and just hang out with. It was really, really helpful, because as I moved through graduate school, we did get more students in my lab. I also made really strong connections with students in the other labs, and we were this really lovely peer group of support for each other. A lot of people who were much more open to talking about what are we doing with animal research and is the research really benefiting them, as well as talking about just generally grad school and sharing our challenges with each other. That was huge. And then in the sort of big picture of my life, I've two lifelong coping strategies that I could mention, which are meditation and journaling. And my meditation practice really helps me with everything. It's grounding and it gives me a sense of peace, even in a world where I don't understand everything and have all of the answers. So I can feel at peace with not having an answer for everything, with maybe not knowing if I'm making the best choices, but I can still move forward with the choices that I'm making. It makes me feel like it's worth asking questions that we don't have answers to and not necessarily feeling pressured to come up with an answer right away. That asking the question itself can be important. And as for journaling, I'm a writer. I've always been a writer. I love writing. I write everything from like really personal ideas, just sort of feelings vomit onto the page that I wouldn't share with anyone, to blogging. I had a public blog in grad school called Squid a Day that also was really helpful because I was just writing about the latest squid news for a general audience, not for scientists. And it kept me connected to this question of the value of science, the why of science, which when you're really deeply in it in grad school, it's I think a little bit easy to get disconnected sometimes. But I would be just writing about not necessarily the research I was doing, but other people's research. Whatever reason that animals might be in the news, maybe because there was a new sculpture about octopuses or something. And so it helped me think about, science can inform conservation and sustainability and art and all kinds of theater and all kinds of things. And so that was a great thing that helped me a lot too. One practical lesson I learned was that I didn't really want to keep doing that kind of research, which is a part of why I left academia and switched to a science communication career. But it's interesting because at the time I didn't really think of this animal sacrifice that I was doing as a failure specifically. I wasn't happy about it, but it's only now that I'm processing it that I label it a moral failure. And in the years since, I have been sort of using it to learn more about myself and my values and kind of how to hold multiple perspectives and hold respect for other people's perspectives. And one way that I think this has sort of I've healed a bit or made connections where previously I was more disconnected was in becoming a parent after graduate school. I have two kids, and when they were starting to walk and talk and notice things and ask questions, sometimes we would see dead animals, usually insects. So they'd see like a dead bee on the ground, and it would maybe make them sad, and we'd end up talking about death and how animals, including people, all go through this cycle of birth and death. And initially I would bring this very scientific energy of like, oh, this is so cool. Look at its wings, look at its legs, look at how its body is put together. And very quickly I realized that I also was missing and needed to sort of reabsorb the empathy that my children were feeling for that animal. And that made us all feel so much better to have that time of feeling it's okay to find dead bodies interesting, and it's also okay to feel sad about them. And to take a moment to have some grief and to treat them with respect. And then as my kids got older and started school, I started coming in and doing little science lessons with their classes. I wanted to show them biology and anatomy, but I didn't want to do a dissection with something like kill a squid and bring it in. And sort of like when we were bringing the squid into classrooms in graduate school that had already been sacrificed or fished or whatever, the dead bees were great for that because bees die a lot and it's pretty easy to collect dead bees from the sidewalk if you're looking for them. And so I thought, okay, if I'm going to be bringing in dead bees for the kids to look at and kind of understand insects and understand bodies and biology, how do I want to teach that? And it really is wonderful because in a classroom full of kids, I feel like there's a lot more freedom and a lot less sort of judgment and expectations than there is once you get to graduate school. I was with these kindergartners saying, it's okay. How does this make you feel? It's okay if it makes you feel sad. It's okay if maybe you don't feel connected to it. However you feel, we do need to treat these bodies with respect. And they were very receptive to that. And it was really beautiful. I feel like it sort of helped heal this disconnect that I had experienced in grad school. One sort of preemptive bit of advice that I really want to share and that I wish I had heard and thought about more is that it's really, really important when you are looking for a graduate advisor or for a lab to work in or a research group. I say lab because I have a science background, but research group is basically the same, to meet the people you're going to work with and really consider whether that environment is a good fit for you, regardless of how excited you are about the research that they're doing. Talk to alumni of the lab, find out what their experiences were and what their relationships were like, because I think people often go into graduate school really excited about the research. I love cephalopods. I was so excited to get to devote all of my time to them. But it's still a job and a workplace, and it's so important that it be a good work environment for you. And so I know that a lot of graduate students are already in their environment and don't have a lot of choice about that, but it's still worth, a lot of people are going to go on to do postdocs. And so like, just something to keep in mind. And then sort of for more specific to that experience of failure in graduate school, I think that it's important to remember that it's okay to reconsider something you've already done or you're already in the middle of doing, and to see if it is really aligning with your goals and values. And even if it's not something that really hinges on values, like, is it working? Because I think sometimes I would get into doing experiments and feel like I had to complete them. Whereas if I took a step back, I might notice like this is already like there's something faulty in here where I'm not going to be able to use the data. So maybe it would be better to just like stop and design something else. And in particular for me, when I had started this process of decapitating lots and lots of squid, it would have been really hard to decide all of a sudden I don't want to do this anymore. Partly because of the practical impacts of that on what I had designed as my research project, but also because I've had to say, I've been doing a bad thing. I've been making mistakes, and that can be hard, but it's also universal. Humans all make mistakes. Our peers make mistakes. Our mentors make mistakes. Our children make mistakes. And I think that if we can acknowledge that they are mistakes without getting defensive and forgive ourselves without beating ourselves up, then that is possibly one of the most useful tools in life. And we can use it towards ourselves and towards other people too, and acknowledge that other people are making mistakes without sort of overreacting or getting defensive on their behalf. And I think I'm getting better at this, sort of recognizing that no matter what I may have said or done before, at any time, I have the freedom to make some new decision for how I want to move forward. Thank you to the Failsafe Science Project for inviting me to discuss failure, which is not a common invitation that I get, and a very much appreciated one. I hope that my story helps other graduate students who are out there.